Welcome back to another episode of the Panameer Ask the Expert podcast, where you learn Oracle Cloud strategy from world's leading experts. Joining me today again is Scott Walls. Thank you, Scott, for coming in.
Good to be here.
The second time in a row now, but today we have a different topic because we want to talk about a very common problem of companies that are today in legacy software like PeopleSoft and want to move into cloud. And this road can be a little bit bumpy, but Scott, may I take your story a little bit away, because you worked in PeopleSoft for many, many years, and now you're in cloud for 7 or 8 years. And I know that
Correct.
You started out in cloud deploying software like you did in PeopleSoft, but you said that with the time and over the last few years, your role in deployments kind of changed. Can you explain that to me?
Sure. I'd say I'm just focusing on the Oracle Cloud roles. When I got involved in Oracle Cloud, it was more of a deployment role. So 2017 for the first, let's say, 4 years. And then as I became more comfortable and was really starting to evolve out of just the software into the strategy or best practices, I was then asked to help other firms that had implemented but weren't getting the value from the software. So kind of like a redesign role. And then more recently, I'm now, I think, performing a similar role to the redesign, but in a more proactive way. I'm now providing more of a readiness, a preparatory role, if you will. And just to get a little bit tactical, when you're in the redesign world, you're think of it like an audit. You have findings and then you rank and roadmap them. And this is that, but in a preparation role. And I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit more. So I think that's just generally how my role shifted since, let's say, 2017.
It sounds like not just your role, right? It sounds like the approach of clients to go into cloud changes, because this proactive thinking is not what we saw in the beginning, right? When we came from on-prem, because everybody was still in that mindset.
Correct. And I think there was a little bit of a struggle to figure out how much is an implementation, right? Remember, the whole shift of the way they played software used to be licensing and then a recurring, and now it's just the recurring. So what are the ratios of estimating the software costs this much, the services cost that much? And then there was also the thought that you could just lift and shift, and that really wasn't the case.
Yeah, especially not with cloud, right? I mean, it's
Correct.
Fundamentally different from the on-prem world that we had before.
Fundamentally, yes. It's probably the single biggest takeaway.
Probably let's get a little bit deeper into that, because there may be somebody listening to that who's still in on-prem, like PeopleSoft, for example, and we want to talk about today. What is the biggest things, or are the biggest things that you want people to understand when they want to make this transition into cloud?
So let's pick 3 major things. I think the first, right, and if any of my clients are watching, I always use the same hand gestures, right? It's like the little Italian in me, if you will. So in on-prem, we had a lot greater degree of control of the software, and we could bend, manipulate, change the software to support what the business does and how it operates today. Again, single biggest thing you want to understand is moving into cloud, that's not true. Yes, you can change cloud much more, I think, than people give it credit for. But really at this point, you want to bend the business, change the business to fit into cloud. And it's also equally as important to understand this is probably one of the last times you're going to do a wholesale reevaluation. Wouldn't call it re-engineering, but in that vein of being able to change or tweak your business. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is now this proactivity is coming around to where my clients are starting to realize, okay, so some implementations have been successful, some have been redesigned. What is it that we should be doing or thinking about proactively to prepare us to get ready for cloud? I think that's been a big change. And the other one that's very interesting, and this happened, I think, came more out of the early Workday playbook when they did not have the range of functionality in their own app, and they had to integrate with other applications to have an end-to-end process. And so this concept of, and I know that this will be a little bit controversial, you don't have to do it all at once. If there isn't just black and white transformation or nothing. So the preparation and then this concept, and I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit, of, well, what does that mean? If I'm not doing big bang or all of my application at once, what does that option sound like?
Right. No, I think that's a very good point, especially as usually the, let's say, kind of suggestion is to move your whole business into cloud all at once. So it's a very interesting approach. I think that comes from actual real world experience, not just the idea of would be nice to be in cloud. But let's get back to the second thing you said, because I think that's so interesting. And we had kind of a similar conversation with Eddie Kearney about it, where we talked about big companies kind of struggle sometimes to get into cloud because they do not have their data consolidated or cleansed in a way that allows you to get into cloud. I mean, that is what you said, right? To understand, are you actually ready to get into that?
Yeah. So the data is one piece of it. So let's quickly drill on what you just asked. So if you have an item file, a supplier file, if you have contracts, and you have multiple lines of business, or if you have items across multiple installations of one ERP or different ERPs, I'm a hospital and I'm in 6 different locations, then cleansing that item file, unifying it. Or Eddie's conversation was really around suppliers and fragmentation and whether or not they are, whether you've normalized them, whether you've archived them, right? So that's a kind of a little bit of a preparation. Contract's the same. If I have multiple lines of business, is my professional services contract the same in this location, region, line of business as it is in the others? Do I need to take this opportunity? It's all about this preparation, readiness opportunity to get a little bit better ready for this last implementation that just happens to be in the cloud. I think some of that would also be around, why does your organization function the way that it does? What are the mandates in the value or the cost or the people in that organization? And cloud operates a certain way. So tactically, if I'm going to take the roles and privileges from cloud, you'd want them to line up to your roles and privileges in your organization, public or private. And as we know, public organizations are very role focused. If you're going to tweak those, what if it involves a union? So then there might be time that's needed for you to resolve those issues, for you to prepare your strategy, for you to prepare your data, for you to decide this strategy needs those KPIs, and I need to get all these. I'm going to ask an implementer. Here's the best way to say it, because Eddie and I did a gig. The implementer or the implementation we were on didn't have basic, globally defined, agreed upon rules of the road and how they process their transactions. And there was a huge disconnect in the project saying, look, I need you to tell me the rules of matching, or how you're going to qualify, or if you can do round trip and an MSA for my supplier. And the business was not ready to make those decisions, didn't have a CPO. And so they were struggling, and they felt like the consulting team has no business to decide that, which is probably fair. Excuse me, I'm sorry about the Apple. But at the same time, the implementation team needed those things to move forward. So you can get yourself into a scenario very quickly where you're running a large team and one segment of that team is unprepared, needs to do some blocking and tackling, some socializing, some operationalizing, and now you're creating a drag in the project timeline. And as we know, drag between us on this call and in a meeting is very different than drag on a whole project team, because the chart of accounts isn't ready, because the categorization structure and procurement isn't ready, because we don't understand what a qualification is. And, not to belabor the point, but you understand why. Now the readiness part of that threes that you asked me for, that's really what happened with Eddie and I, and it's what we've seen in several other locations as well.
Right, and it's a good point that you bring, because it's 2 different parts, right? Eddie is very focused on data, and if you watch the Ask the Expert episode with Eddie, highly recommend that. It's super interesting, but it's just focused on data. And what you're bringing in for more of the functional side are the processes as well, and then build a roadmap, or what you call a readiness check, to design your strategy to understand what you're going to do. That's interesting, because I wanted to get a little bit more into that. I think that's something that a lot of end customers might miss when going into cloud, building that strategy on the back of their readiness check. because a lot of people don't even do the readiness check. But let's say now
Yes.
you do this step number 2, you understand cloud and on-prem the difference. You said point number 3, and it may be a little bit controversial, is you don't have to do it all at once. You can get, if I can say it like that, with one step into the door of Oracle Cloud, right? You don't have to move your whole business at once. So let's get maybe a little bit more into detail. Let's say I'm in a company and my procurement department is actually ready after the readiness check and wants to move forward and get at least a little bit into Oracle Cloud, but the rest of the business may not be ready yet to move chart of accounts, etc. So how would you approach that to get a little bit into cloud but not move all of it?
Sure. And let's go back just 2 seconds. I see it more in public and quasi-public than I do in private. It being, today we're here, this is the implementation. There's some degree of blocking and tackling, we'll call it globally, not meaning the region, meaning across the organization, that needs to be done. Different groups are closer, more comfortable to being ready, even though they all probably want to move, but they're not equally as accepting of that challenge for various different reasons, right? And so you are correct. We've had multiple public sector clients, like core public sector, not even quasi, but the quasi is that we've had similarly might have been interested in something like this pre-phase. But you go through the assessment, and it is funny because a lot of times it is procurement. Let me give you some example in a very simple sense why. Procurement, there are certain functions around government onboarding of suppliers that are just not in the on-prem applications, whether it's the quality and detail of the data in a registration process or something called qualifications, right? So U.S. government releases some work. Our Oracle licensee wants to bid on that work, needs to go out to a prime consultant who has sub-consultants out as well that have qualifications. The quals for the sub roll into the prime roll into the bid, right? So they'll say, look, we want that functionality. And how do we get that functionality? Because we don't have that, for example, in PeopleSoft. Okay. Well, how we get that functionality is a partial implementation. And all of them have some degree of variability in them. But the point that I'm trying to make in that third piece of not having to do everything at once is that you do have the option of extending your existing ERP application in a baby step forward to use Oracle Cloud without having to do the whole big bang. And I think that's one of the things that, like I said, that's the third thing in terms of what I've seen more recently that is that's interesting.
Okay, so you're not really, it's not even that you're really moving something from, partially yes, but you're not really moving something from PeopleSoft to cloud, because there is just more functionality in cloud. And you're going to leverage cloud to extend on the existing functionality that you already have. For example, the supplier qualification management module, I don't think that they have something comparable in PeopleSoft, don't they?
No, a lot of your newer development has been occurring since 2015 forward. It's been occurring more so in cloud. They will retroactively move some functionality back. So let's take PeopleSoft and Oracle Cloud. PeopleSoft required a database record to create new fields, and cloud would allow you to do it on the fly in what's called a descriptive flex field, or DFF. My understanding is they might retroactively move that functionality back because it's easier, but largely no, they are keeping the lights on with applications like PeopleSoft. But the newer functionality, remember, cloud's just built differently. The level of integration is on a different level than it is in PeopleSoft. Right? And you would expect that. The roads in California were built much better because the roads on the upper East Coast in New York and DC were older, and the cities were built differently, right? They learned something. And so you see that in cloud. There's a reason. And as the maturity of cloud grows, and cloud's not yet for everybody, or some people have just gotten systems in and they don't want to touch that. That's fair. But like we talked about earlier, different pieces of that organization are seeing that functionality, and they're trying to creatively figure out a way to leverage that. And oh, by the way, they do this readiness check, and you start to understand, so how does that, what's the effect on my staff of my ITPM, my change management, my 3 developers, my guys watching the app server, the database server? What's the effect of now getting incremental releases consistently, and how long do I have to take them? And so you can take it on faith that you're going to do this big implementation. But what this call really now is discussing is there is another option, and that option is a more muted, taking a slice or a baby step into cloud. And so, yes, you hit an area where we hit an area in qualifications where this works well, where just procurement says, look, we want to start this journey. We know we're headed there. We're not organizationally ready. That's where we are today, right? But we want some things.
Yeah.
And we know that we're headed there. We know we're going to be there at some point. What are my options in the in-between?
Right. And again, I mean, everything we are talking about here should be taken with a grain of salt, of course, because it highly depends on what you said before, right? Your step 2, this readiness check is super important. So, I mean, could be good for if you're listening, could be good for your organization, or maybe not. Maybe you also want to, I think it could eventually make sense to also bring contracts in, right? Depending on what structure you already have. I don't want to get too deep into that.
Yeah, but I would frame it like this. Let's use tactical examples. There's a large multi-billion-dollar organization that was thinking lift and shift and started down cloud. And between deployment 1 in a region to deployment 2, deployment 1 had no round trip, no supplier self-service. They kept constantly saying, we're not mature enough to do these things, and wish that we would have had you there when we did the original design. And they did an audit. Again, this is the reactive audit during implementation, 38 different findings, over $10 million of savings per year. They were in credit holds. They had actually taken the Oracle supplier portal and wrapped Azure Microsoft security around it. That's not even Oracle. That's a CSOC blocking and tackling that should have been done before. But when you're in an implementation and you're getting a lot of different pieces moving at the same time, it's just harder to react to that. And so you're talking about those guys hit some serious pain, 10 million plus, and they're clearly of the mind now that if we would do this again, we would do this preparation phase so that we would be able to better handle some of these, so that we would have the right eyes and strategy and procurement and not be creating it on the fly. Remember, we talked a little bit earlier, the client says, hey, you're forcing the project team, you're creating business rules. You don't do that. That's not your role, right? Well, we had to do that because a system adjudicates nothing but rules in processing. And so that's really, again, I want to stress 2 to 3 when we had the original, what are the 3 things? You know, the new concept of cloud change your business. The second is that you want to prepare in a readiness assessment. And the third is you don't have to do it all at once. The big piece has been, rather than reactively doing a design audit and saying, okay, how do we now staff up, more money, more time, project expense? How can we move that forward so that your organization is ready and you don't have that kind of pain, right? You can take 2 months to normalize your contracts. You can decide which of your qualifications are core, have to be done versus extended. And then you have to have, the way Oracle works, you have to have those qualifications built into questionnaires, and they have to be organized based on commodity codes or product and service codes. Not a lot of people are set up like that. Their qualifications exist in a spreadsheet somewhere, and that's the level of maturity they're at. And I think it's a good thing when you hear, oh, I don't know if we're mature enough. Well, the readiness is telling your business, hey, this is coming for you. Let's help you get mature. And if you're a smart business, you're going to try to not give the consultant all those tasks because it's expensive when we're in a spreadsheet billing you hundreds of bucks an hour. It's probably smarter to identify that, huddle with your team first, get that data ready, because now you're, oh, okay, so they've told us the data needs to look like this. It needs to be prepped. It needs to have a column called core or extended for this qualification. And it needs to tell me in a checkbox which of these different commodities require a health and safety, require insurance, require design, bridge, build, right? So anyway, I think that's what the big shift has been.
That's a perfect summary, I think, of our conversation here. And I think every consultant will be happy to hear that, because it will make our life easier. And also, it's good to see that more and more customers understand that and want to prepare. They don't want to go through this massive pain of trying to attempt a redesign while being 2 weeks before UAT. So I think that's a very good, I mean, nobody wants that, but it's a very good mind shift to understand we want to do this first. Then we go through some internal work to prepare for our implementation in cloud. And then we have a clean implementation and we save ourselves a lot of time on the implementation and also a lot of pain if you have to go to a redesign afterwards. So that's...
I make two more comments too. So I want to make sure that I'm not trying to be viewed as selling two implementations. I two other comments because these came up in some of the ones that we've done. First, it should be short, right? When you talk about this readiness check, I think you're in the 8 to 12 week max. And then also additionally, if you're that first 4 weeks is kind of your go, no go, because if you say, yes, I'm going to do this, a certain segment of the team needs to start to go and negotiate any licenses that they need. So that what you really want is at the end, and this is important, a lot of organizations are very tactical. And so they would wait until they're at the end of the first, or within 2 weeks at the end of the first readiness check before they start to try to schedule any other work that's going to be done. I think you want to block that off. You want to assume that work is going to happen. Better, you can always cancel it, but then you start to put these gates in your readiness check that says, oh, okay, so if we're going to do this, we need to license software. If we're going to do this, we need to start to get the consultants that we've spent time that have been here and have learned all this about our business are going to be the same consultants that we've got here when we want to roll into that next phase. That's the only thing I would say is let's make sure that we understand that this is not a forever phase. It has some very definite outcomes that we've decided what we're going to do and who's going to do it, how long it's going to take. And whenever I do this, right, that's my roadmap. And it's the same thing I'm going to give you if we're in a redesign. I want to give you the same thing up front. Based on what I've heard from you across your organization, this is when you're ready. And different organizations will say, look, we're going to parade everybody in because we just want to build awareness and then we'll slot them later. And some say, no, they're good, but it's going to freak them out. We want you just to help us get our S-curve, but that roadmap is what's going to be helpful. And so that means you need to find obstacles. You need to rank them for size, volume, a cultural fit, and then you need to build a roadmap of when they're going to be deployed.
Yeah. That's a good add-on, so it doesn't get misunderstood. No, I mean that is probably a lot for today, right? We have different aspects that you want to understand. If I recap that in my own words really quick, first you definitely have to understand you're an on-prem world and you're going to move into cloud. This will work differently. It requires you to understand your own processes, to unify your business and to adapt, at least to a certain degree, to what cloud wants you to do and is designed to run for, so you get a good outcome and all the value, right? And then you have this idea of a readiness check that doesn't take forever, but is a defined phase of 8 to 12 weeks or something with definite outcomes, so your business can make decisions based on that. And then the third thing that we also talked about, not every company has to move the whole business all at once into cloud. There are options to tip your toe into the water to try if you like it first.
Yeah,
so these are the
hybrid
three things
approach.
I think. Hybrid, yeah, definitely. I think that still, even though that's incredible value, but thank you very much for coming in and telling and sharing all of that. I think that's probably only in the beginning days and more clients will start to do that. So super cool to have your insight on that. Still, I understand that is very dependent on the business case, like 100% depending on the business case. So of course, if you are listening, don't take everything just for what we said, but get yourself help. I mean, Scott, if that's okay, I'll put your contact details down in the description so people can book a call with you if they want to.
Sure. No, absolutely. And I think a lot of people do pieces of this, right? The business case, or they do pieces, but absolutely. And I'm more than glad to field calls and provide what I see and what I've done to help clients get over that hurdle.
Right. Because we've seen that over and over again. The pain of waiting too long to do that massively outweighs the pain of taking 1 or 2 hours now, or even maybe some weeks to plan the right way. So that's it. I'll put your contact details down in the description. thank you for joining us today.
Good to be here.
Hope to have you back soon. And you guys, remember to subscribe to the channel to not miss out on the next episode of Ask the Expert.